So that then brings us to number 7. Not responding correctly to traffic signs. So the first part of this means going to the wrong side of a keep left sign. So very often when they go to turn right and perhaps there's a traffic bollard in the middle of the road with the keep left sign, they don't see it, they go to cut it. That happens quite a lot. Depending on the area that you live in, there's a few bus stops by us which are level or alongside keep left signs. So if the bus is in the bus stop, which is on the road, there's a bollard next to it, which not only blocks the road, it means people are then tempted to go the wrong side of the keep left only sign, and your learners could do that. So again, on your part 2, is that something you've gone to do or done? For the part 3, is that something that your pupils have done before? We can look and we can analyse this. The next subtopic is that they ignore a stop sign or a no entry sign. Again, that's happened with pupils, which we'll show you. That on test, the examiner has said at the traffic lights turn left, but there's a no entry road before the traffic lights, and they've gone to turn left because obviously it's a one-way coming out, it's got no entry signs, and they've gone to turn into it. There are also issues sometimes with stop signs, because remember, a stop sign is to be treated like a traffic light. You come up to it and you stop, and it's a definite stop. Then you have to make sure of your observations, right, left and right. Then if it's clear, go. We had an issue many years ago. A pupil was on their test. They were coming up to a stop sign and there was a queue of traffic and there was a bus. But then there was a gap because the bus was going to leave the junction open for people to get out. So the pupil was slowly rolling up, saw the gap, the bus driver waved him through, and he carried on through. He didn't stop at the stop sign. Now the examiner failed him for that, and basically the examiner said, think of the stop sign like a red light. If someone waved you through a red light, would you keep going? Hopefully the answer is no. So the same is true at a stop sign. That's why very often you'll find for the part 2 test, if you encounter a stop sign, the trainee will put the handbrake on briefly, because that's proof that you have stopped, and then they quickly release it and go again. That's just so that there can be no doubt that you haven't just rolled through at 1 or 2 miles an hour. And that's what very often on the ADI part 2 people do. And the danger is for the ADI part 3 that your pupils can do that. You see them looking, they see it's clear, but that stop sign means you have to stop. So you need to be sure and aware of that. The third subpoint is driving in a bus lane. People don't realise that the bus lane starts, or they just don't know that it's there and they drive into it. Of course, that's an automatic fail on test. But do we do that in our part 2? For the part 3, do your pupils go to do that? Do you then pull them up when it's safe to analyse what would happen if there was a bus there? It could be sometimes that the bus lane has specific times, like 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. So the last time they had a lesson was 6:15, and so therefore 6:15 p.m. the bus lane isn't in operation and you can quite legally drive in it. Well, this time it's before 6 o'clock, so that same principle doesn't apply because now the bus lane is in operation. So again, looking at it, is that something we do on our Part 2 training? Is it something our pupils on Part 3 either go to do or have done, and we've just perhaps said, oh, you need to get out of the bus lane, or not perhaps even noticed? The fourth sub-point of this, choosing the wrong lane at a roundabout with clear signage. When you approach the roundabout, you get into the wrong lane when a sign clearly shows which lane you should be in. You then go around the roundabout in the wrong lane. So you're coming up to the roundabout, perhaps you've been asked to follow the road ahead, second exit. The lane that you're in clearly says left only, but you stay in that left lane and then follow it round to the second exit. But the road markings, the road signs have said which lane you need to be in. So again, has this happened on the Part 2? If it has, that would be an automatic fail. With the Part 3, have your pupils gone to do this? Have they done it but you haven't noticed it? So you can think of the routes that you do. Do you have routes for the Part 3 and standards check test where you can encounter road signs like this, where straight ahead perhaps is right hand lane, or there's a roundabout in Telford where you can go right third exit and fourth exit from the left lane. Both lanes are designated to go right. So you do have weird anomalies like that. You've just got to make sure, one, that you're following the correct signs for the ADI Part 2, but also for the Part 3 and standards check. Are your pupils doing the same? The fifth sub-point, acting late or not at all to speed limit changes. So going through, again, this is a given on Part 2. The sign says 30, they go past it at 35 or 40, don't notice it. Happens so often with your pupils, even with all the training. We had a driving test recently where we were in the test centre and we said, remember, if you come out of here, turn left, head towards this specific location, look out for that 30 sign. Yeah. Sure enough, they turned left, they went to that specific location, drove past the 30 at 35, their test was over within 2 minutes. And I'm like, it was literally the last thing we discussed before you went on your test. So even with the best preparation, they still get it wrong. But for the Part 2, you may do that and not even notice. Because if there's nobody there to say you've just gone through the 30 at 35, probably most of the traffic is doing the same. For the ADI Part 3, is that what your pupils do? Do they not notice the change of speed limit signs? A few years back, we were teaching someone for the Part 2, and the area that they worked in was a 20 zone. And he was practicing for Part 2. We went through where he was working and we said, oh, remember, watch your speed, it's only a 20. How long has this been 20? It's always been 20. Do you know, I've worked here 15 years. I never knew it was a 20 mile an hour zone. And he's practicing for part 2, or was. So it's so easy to do. So do we look for changes? New road, is there a new speed limit? As you approach a roundabout, is there a change before the roundabout? Is there a change as you come off the roundabout? But then acting too late, so that means they come, whizzing up, and then they suddenly see at the last minute it goes from 50 to 30 or 60 to 30, and they just whack the brake on and slow it right down. Well, again, on test, that's a fail, because if there was a bus or a lorry behind, they simply can't stop that quickly. And even with a car, they're probably not expecting you to do that, because as we've said, not everybody notices the change of speed limit signs. So that car behind can just be thinking it's 60. The next thing, you're whacking that brake on to bring it down to 30. So for part 2, did we find ourselves doing that? Coming up, going, uh-oh, and then whacking the brake on? If we do, that would be a fail on your part 2 test. You're supposed to look ahead, see it coming, check the mirror to see how close anything is behind, and start responding to it earlier. For the part 3 test, the standards check, do you notice your pupils to see if they're noticing that sign? Or do you have to go, slow down, there's a 30? Well, that's that. Yeah, we need to look and assess further ahead. That's the key to it, really. The final sub point in this part is going ahead at a green light, but the junction isn't clear. So they're just responding to the traffic light rather than actually looking. And that says this results in either you blocking the junction or impeding someone's progress. So in other words, you drive across when you shouldn't. And for the part 2, have you ever found yourself blocking a junction and kind of looking sideways as if they don't exist? Just pretending they're not really there. For the part 3, have your pupils done that? Have you ever ended up going, well, really, it would have been better to have waited rather than come across? Well, we need to be proactive. We need to tell them that in advance. So by looking at it for ourselves, do we respond to these signs on the part 2, or for the part 3, the standards check? Do our pupils, does our trainer respond to these signs? And it just says in 2021 there were 1,683 casualties where people disobeying traffic lights was a factor in the collision. Now bear in mind, this is the 7th most popular reason that people fail their test. So pupils are doing this on their actual driving test. So are they doing it in their lessons? People are doing it in their driving. So are we one of them? Do we notice ourselves doing it? Then we can assess ourselves for the part 2 and part 3 more accurately. So that brings us to point 6, not responding appropriately to traffic lights. So the first sub point is failing to react to a red light. When the red light is clearly showing, you still try to proceed through. That's on the driving test. So again, for the part 2, we might respond to it at the last second and whack the brake on and stop, but we shouldn't be. For the part 3, is that something your pupils have gone to do? So therefore, can we get them to preempt the lights changing, get them thinking in advance? If we can, that helps reduce this. And it is one of those things, in fairness, that sometimes your best pupils who you've been bored with on lessons, because they're just doing everything properly, then choose the day of test to try and drive through 2 red lights. And it's like, why? So that still happens. But again, from our point for the part 2, for the part 3, is this something that we've done or our pupils have done? The second sub-point, stopping after the first white line when there are advanced stop lines for cyclists. So that's that bike box. It says at a signal control junction, we position over the first white line in the area for cyclists. Now, the highway code does say if it was because of slow moving traffic and then the lights change and you get caught in it, then it is permissible. However, what happens a lot is you see the red light on and you just drive over into that box because you're stopping at the solid white line closest to the traffic lights. That's an automatic fail on the driving test. So for the part 2, is that something that we've done or we do? You see, unless you have someone to point it out, you probably wouldn't realise. The times we've had that with part 2 students, and they haven't realised they've gone into it till we've played it back, and suddenly they go, I didn't even realise. Do we allow our pupils to do that? Is that something that you think, actually, we've got quite a few of those, and I've never really looked to see if that's what my student does. So can we plan a route that involves some of those? And it is hard because sometimes you might just drive around and every time you come to the traffic light, it's on green, so you just keep going. So it takes a lot of going round in squares or circles to get it so that the lights are changing and you're the first car in the queue. But we can then analyse that with our pupils. The third sub-point, not progressing when you're waiting to turn right at a junction and it is safe to proceed. So it says when you need to turn right, you continue to wait in the middle of the junction when the repeater light has turned red and the oncoming traffic has stopped. This causes you to completely block the junction controlled by traffic lights. So in other words, you're in the middle waiting, the lights change, you get your gap, but you sit there waiting. Do we, for the part 3, teach our pupils to look for gaps, not cars? This is what we need to do with them. For the part 2, do we stop, zone out, and then go, oh, I can go? But, you know, you've already got cars coming towards you. Are we late to respond? So that's what we need to assess with ourselves and our pupils. The fourth sub-point, not going ahead when a green light is showing and the junction ahead is clear. So we've had that a couple of times when the light changes and the pupils just zoned out, not looking at the light, or they've come up to the light and it's changed quite quickly and they're kind of expecting it to be a 30 or 40 second wait, and then all of a sudden, you know, you either hear the horn behind or you have to say, what is it that we're waiting for? What colour is the light? So this is a common thing that can happen. Or it might be that you're on filter lights with the arrows and your light, which says straight ahead, is on, but they're looking at the other traffic light which still says red, so they just sit there. Again, for the part 2, do we know how to deal with filter lights? Or do you think, well, actually, I still don't get those? We do have a video on those, by the way. We can analyze it. Sometimes it's the secondary light that catches people. There could be two sets of lights, and your set has gone green, but the set in the distance, which is totally separate because there's another white line up by them, that one is still on red, so they're paying attention to that. This is what we've got to look and think, do I do that? Have I been caught out by that? Do my pupils do that? So can I teach them where to look in a specific situation? Can I teach them where to look and how quickly? Remember, we don't know how quick these lights are going to change, so keep your eye on them because they could change quite quickly. So that brings us then to point 5. Not having proper control of the steering. So that means repeatedly not steering enough or steering late on approach to junctions when turning left. When you turn left, you repeatedly understeer, not following the curb. That means there's not enough space for vehicles turning right to fit alongside your car. In other words, when you go left, you go wide and you're almost on or over the white line, which means anything coming down to turn right either has to take evasive action or just stop to let you through. Now, this is where using MSPSGL comes in. So when we're turning left, we do mirrors, then signal. Well, how's our position for the part 2, for the part 3? Do they start to swerve out as if they're a 40-foot lorry that needs to swing out before turning left? Does their position remain the same? Is it because the speed is too fast? They're approaching too quickly, so they basically go round wide. Do they go round wide because the next part of the routine is gears? Are they coming up to that turn and at that point starting to desperately change down into second gear? Linked with gear is clutch. Is the clutch up? So if they're coming down the hill and they're changing into second, now they've got the clutch down, which means gravity is going to take over and they end up going wide because they then start to accelerate quicker than they should. So gear, is that an issue? Or then the final part, look. Are they looking for the point of turn? Are they preempting it? So for us, we tell our pupils when the curb is in the bottom left corner of the windscreen, that's when we turn. Again, are they turning enough? But the look part first is that curb in that point? Or are they waiting and going, right, there's that point, now I start to steer? Well, now you're half a car past that point, half a car's length past that point. So you're going to go wide. But then that's linked with, are they steering enough? So we tend to say it's half a turn to the left. Are they just doing that? And so they're going wide. Because sometimes what happens is that pupils will stop steering. It's not going where they want, so they'll put the foot on the brake to slow it down to kind of make it go that way. What's the real cause of it? That's what you want to find out on the ADI Part 3. And for the ADI Part 2, the Part 3, the standards check, if you're in a manual using MSPSGL, will mean there is nothing on the go that your pupils can do that isn't covered by that. What caused it? Our position. he started to swing out. Speed, he was coming up too fast. Gear, he was in the wrong gear. Or the clutch was still down, so we picked up speed going downhill. Look, he wasn't looking at the curb. He was focusing on the car coming the other way. So by using that, we can see, but when we do it on the part 2, do we find ourselves going wide? That could be one of the reasons why. The second sub-point, not steering enough when going around a bend. So when going around a bend, you don't steer enough. This causes both passenger side wheels to mount the pavement. So again, MSPSGL, is the position where it should be? Or are they thinking, oh, I'm going to turn, I best start steering? Well, is that curb in the bottom left corner of the windscreen? No, well, it's not time to turn then, because the curb is still straight. It isn't time to turn. Speed, is it going too fast? So therefore, they try and overcompensate with the steering. Gear, are we still in 3rd or 4th gear? So again, by going too fast, we're trying to overcompensate for it. Look, is that curb where it should be? No. So therefore, it's not time to turn. Could be that they're turning too much. They're worried about going wide. So instead of half a turn, they're doing 1 full turn. This is what you need to look at for the part 3. What's the cause of it? Why is my pupil doing it? But is your pupil doing it? Does that happen to your pupils? If it does, then you can work on it, pull them up, give them a reference point, give them a focal point. Does that happen to us on the part 2? Do you go around corners and suddenly the back wheel is coming up and off the curb? So we can assess it. Steering late when turning into a minor road. When you turn right, you steer late and not enough, and this causes the swan neck effect, and you drive fully onto the wrong side of the new road to correct your position. So this basically comes down to 2 things. The look on approach. Can I go? Do I need to turn? So we think of ourselves as a pedestrian crossing the road. Can I walk across before that car gets to me? If the answer is no, then just come up and stop. Because what happens is the car coming towards us, they see it and they just want to go past it before they turn. But what that means is, in effect, they're overshooting the road. And that's what causes the swan neck effect. But then it's a lot of steering to try and get it back. So if you can't go, which you need to look and assess before you get to that point, do you think we can go in this gap, Chris? No. Good. So where are we going to stop? Level with the centre line of the road we're turning into. And then we do the turn. We don't just keep rolling, overshoot the road and then try steering back. But also the reason that they then go onto the wrong side of the road or go onto the white line is if we think of the new road that they're turning into as a clock, when the front of the car is at the 11 o'clock position, that's when we need to steer 1 turn back to the left. Because remember, very often they're used to doing left turns, and a left turn is a gentle bend, whereas a right turn is a pronounced angle. So it takes a lot more steering. Generally, to go around the left turn, as we've said, is half a turn, whereas a right turn is normally 1 full turn to the right. So therefore, 1 full turn to the left. And if we show them, look, imagine the new road as a clock, when we're at the 11 o'clock position, that's when we steer 1 turn to the left. That will bring them back into position because the wheels are still at quite a a sharp angle at that point. So if this is something we face quite regularly with our students, this could be the answer. Give them reference points, give them focal points that they can understand, because this is what people are doing on the day of test. This isn't the first time turning right, but everyone struggles with this. And if you struggle with this on part 2, try that method yourself. See how it goes. Turning back earlier, turning more, or just stopping if you can't go, but you've reached the centre line of the new road. Just stop, wait for the gap, then go. The next point is, or sub-point is, repeatedly mounting the pavement when pulling up on the left. Again, this is very often because they don't have a reference point that your pupils will do that. If you're doing the ADI part 2, do you end up doing this? Do you feel your wheels scrub against the curb so you pull it back? Do you find yourself actually going up the pavement and coming back off again? There are 2 reasons for this generally. The first is that people look in the mirror, the side mirror, passenger side mirror. But the mirror is what's happening 10 feet behind you, not what's happening in front of you. So if your car is coming in at an angle to the curb, at the point that you hit the curb and smash into the lamppost, you'll look in your mirror and go, oh man, I've got a big gap, I've got another 6 feet yet, because your car is at an angle. So the important thing is where the front of the vehicle is, not where the back is. So the second reason is that people don't have a focal point at the front. So when your pupil first gets in for the part 3, the standards check, and your car is pulled up correctly because you're the one that's parked it there, just say to them, what I want you to do is look at the curb, follow it back towards the car. Where does it meet the dashboard? Now, very often they'll say on the windscreen wiper, and they'll give you a point, which is great until it starts raining. And then that focal point is doing that. So if they say the windscreen wiper, say to them, that's great, but where would that be on the dashboard? Where does it look at the front of our car? And then they've got that. So when we pull up, Chris, remember you said when we pulled up, the curb was about halfway on the dashboard. Just get it into that point. Do that a few times, just moving off and stopping. So even if you're coming up to test and they still have this problem, which does happen, have a lesson moving off and stopping, just so that they can get that focal point in their head and get used to looking in front of the car instead of in the passenger mirror when they pull up. You can use the mirror just to double check that the car's straight, but as we've said, the mirror is telling you what's happening 6 to 10 feet behind you, not where the front of your car is. And that's why people then mount the pavement. Bear in mind, this is the 5th most common reason for failing the driving test. So do you do this on your part 2? Try using a focal point, a reference point. Do your pupils do this? But you're still saying, well, check that mirror, look in that mirror. You're going forwards. You need to be looking at where the front of the car is. The 5th sub-point for this topic is steering late when moving out to pass parked vehicles. So it says when you approach a parked vehicle, you steer late and get too close to it, which is known as shaving the parked vehicle. You end up a good distance from it, but on the approach you come up and then have to swerve round. or the examiner ends up pushing the wheel. Again, give them a reference point. Give them a focal point so that they know. You want to go to a quiet road, get a car that's already parked up, help them if it's needed on the part 3 to just move into position so that you're still behind the car, but you're out at the distance that you would want to be. And you say to them, where does the side of that car, the driver's side of that parked vehicle, where does it meet the front of our car? And they might say sort of at the side of the windscreen, where the windscreen wiper is on the passenger side. So what about the dashboard? Where? Oh, just that little speaker thing on the left-hand side of the dashboard. So that's where we want to get it on approach to that vehicle. So as we're coming up, we want to keep it so that the end of that windscreen wiper, that dashboard part, that's what we want to go by rather than the windscreen. That part is then alongside or on the edge of that vehicle. And what you'll find is as they're coming up, they'll just naturally swing out to see it go past. So you're giving them a reference point. How do I get it? Because what everyone does is pull up alongside the car, open the passenger door and say, this is the distance we need to be from the parked vehicle. Great, but how do I get to that point? This is what happens on test. That they know they've got to be a door's width or so alongside the car, but how do they get to that point on approach? And again, this is the 5th most common reason that people fail their test, that they come up and literally swerve around the car and end up doing what's called shaving it. They don't hit it, but they do come that close that the examiner's going, whoa, this is not what we want to do. So by giving them a reference point, a focal point, if you find yourself doing this, if you find on the ADI part 2, you know, when you're out practicing perhaps and you've got family in the car, you suddenly see them tense up as you go around a vehicle. It could be something we're doing. So by using reference points and focal points, it helps us for the part 2, and it definitely helps us for the part 3 and the standards check test.